So, good afternoon. Now I'm heard. Good afternoon here for the last time. It's 5 o'clock. We have the last talk in this room, and it's by Yanyi Li on the question if, God, I now forgot the title. Just tell your title and say then hello. And I would just want to inform you that if you want to ask questions, again, use Slido, ask the questions already during the talk. To ask the question, go on slido.com, enter Babel. You can vote on the questions so we know which ones you should answer first. And here's Yanyi Li.
Thank you. Oh, no, wait, ignore that. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to my talk today. I know that it's 5 p.m. and everyone's probably really hungry, I know I am. So you probably have better things to do than sitting here right now, but you chose to come, so I thank you very much for that. As you probably know from the program, today I will be talking about something related to neuroscience. Could different languages strengthen our cognitive health in different ways? So again, my name is Yanyi Li, but I have a lot of Slavic friends, and for some reason everyone started calling me Yana, so I guess I'm suddenly Yana also. So I can also go by that. And before I start, I want to talk a little bit about my cultural background. So I come from Taipei, Taiwan. It's like a mega city, 6 million people. And it means a lot for me to be here today because I just noticed how female Asians are really underrepresented in the polyglot community. I mean, I think I saw only 3 Asian females today, yesterday. So I feel that I'm trying to understand why there are so few female Asian polyglots, and it's really inspiring to be here today to be having exchanges with all of you. So I come from Taipei, Taiwan, but I live in England doing my PhD there. And why am I here today to talk about something extremely nerdy? So I want to talk a little bit about my evolution of interest in languages. So around 10 years ago, I was a happy, carefree Spanish major in Taiwan. And every day, my main priority is just to refine my Spanish-speaking skills. And then later on, I went to do grad school, and I thought languages are actually more than just refining your language skills. I mean, in languages, they don't only concern humanity, but also they have interesting implications for the sciences. For example, there's forensic linguistics, like how language styles can help solve crime. There's machine translation, which is obviously super important these days. There is speech therapy, which has to do with languages and brain disorders. And there's also a bunch of research on the connections between bilingualism and schizophrenia and dementia and that kind of stuff. So I started to become really inspired, right? And I thought I wanted to be a scientist. And I didn't want to just be any scientist. I wanted to be a scientist that works with languages. And I thought, I'm going to do a PhD course that allows me to look at the intersection of language education and neuroscience, so very interdisciplinary. Nowadays, my main research focus, I look at how people use multilingual resources to learn a linguistically distant language. So, for example, I'm really interested in how people with a predominantly Indo-European background, how do they process Mandarin Chinese? I'm really curious to know. So if you have any thoughts, it doesn't have to be Mandarin Chinese. It can be Korean, Hindi, whatever. Or if you're reverse, if you're from Southeast Asia, learning, I don't know, Czech. I'm so curious to know how you process something that's very distant. I'm also very interested to know more about the link between bilingualism and dementia, especially what scientists still do not yet know. I'm trying to figure out what we know and what we do not know, if that makes sense. Last but not least, I am very interested in how the design of different languages strengthens our cognitive health in very different ways, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Okay. Oh, by the way, I want to do a very small self-promotion. So I have a personal website. Usually when I have some free time, I do some analytical news writing, and I sometimes write news that lie in the intersection of languages and the sciences. So I write about languages and educational neuroscience, languages and social science, and languages artificial intelligence. And the website itself is called theappliedlinguist.com. If you're interested, you can subscribe so that I have more motivation to work on my website, because my website has been rotting on the side for many months now. Yeah, so it's completely free. There's no catch. I really enjoy writing. Yeah, so theappliedlinguist.com if you're interested. Okay, without further ado, I've blabbed enough, so let's start with the presentation. So, could different languages strengthen our cognitive health in different ways? Okay. 外国語で書くときは単語の綴りを考えなければならない. Cкладна граматика дуже корисна для розвитку мозку та швидкості реакції. Türkçe öğrenmeye başladım ve birçok kelime ezberliyorum. 中文的语调以及其象形文字分别能够促进听觉以及视觉空间的辨识能力. Una lengua semejante la suya puede ser sorprendentemente difícil de aprender. Una lengua semejante a sua puede ser sorprendentemente difícil de aprender. So, to process those languages just now, namely Japanese, Ukrainian, Turkish, Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, and Portuguese, one has to stimulate various different parts of the brain because of the unique properties of how these languages sound, how they look, how they're structured grammatically, as well as their relations with each other. We all think we know that the purpose of learning a foreign language is to facilitate intercultural communication and to boost economic power. I mean, it almost seems too obvious, right? But what many of us fail to realize is that language learning is also very much a matter of public cognitive health, brain health, basically. And it's very important that we all pay attention to this kind of health because nobody, not you, not me, nobody is truly exempt from declining brain health in old age. For some people, this can imply worrying issues such as mild cognitive impairment or even dementia. Can be a slow and debilitating process of walking into forgetfulness, where time after time you forget words, you forget names, you forget what you did 5 minutes ago. And in the more severe cases of dementia, you can even forget the relationships that once mattered. Even though cognitive decline cannot really be avoided, there are ways to at least defer its development. Indeed, and although this is still sometimes debated by some scientists, but bilingualism, or even better yet, multilingualism, does come with its own set of cognitive benefits. And for some people, lifelong bilingualism even helps defer the onset of dementia by 4 to 5 years. Now, even for people who never get dementia in their lifetime, lifelong bilingualism helps contribute to stronger preservations of the brain. So problems tend to emerge later in life. Hence, while being bilingual or multilingual doesn't necessarily make you more intelligent IQ-wise, it does train your brain to be sharper and a lot more functional for a longer period of your life. Okay, now I'm going to talk about an embarrassing story that led to this research interest, okay? I have nothing to lose, so I'm going to share it. So I worked in Taiwan for some time, and during the time when I was working at a university, I had this massive, intense crush on this Siberian guy who lived next to the university where I taught. Yeah, that's how we learn languages, right? So I thought, okay, in order to grab his attention, I was going to learn Russian. And I thought, you know, because back then I didn't know there was this polyglot gathering, so nobody warned me that when it comes to learning a Slavic language, the first 10 years are the most difficult. Any Slavic language, doesn't matter which one. And then, you know, like, I thought, okay, so like these are my notes, right? And I thought, like every single word that I was learning was just really unfamiliar. Like there are no roots that I can use to like help me learn them. And also they're like super long and hard to pronounce. Like the third one down there, like with up there. The third one up there with like 3 stars. That's the primachatelnost. That's 7 syllables for one word. And it means tourist attraction. And I was just thinking, oh my God, I'm so happy that I wasn't learning Russian for sightseeing, because this would be like, like 7 syllables for one word. And then also, like, I thought that Russian grammar was also very difficult for me. Like, it was very abstract for me, especially the prepositions, right? And I thought, like, I tried really hard, right? And I felt that no matter what I did with Russian, I was using new neural pathways. I was developing new neural pathways to learn every single aspect of this language. And I thought that in comparison with my learning of other languages previously, I was using a very different part of my brain to learn Russian. It's just like, you know, a lot of effort for a guy, so. Okay, and then later on, I met a friend from Ukraine, and also in Taiwan, and then he went on to be my best friend for 4 years now. And when I started to learn his language, Ukrainian, in 2019, I noticed that even though it was also a Slavic language that used Cyrillic alphabet, it just wasn't any easier for me to learn. And here we have some examples. For example, if you see, there are some words that obviously have some similarities. For example, like cholobik, chilabiak, cholobik, chilabak, cholobik, chilabak. If you just look at it, you can understand that they're the same words. But if you want to actually produce in either Russian or Ukrainian, you have to pay attention to how the vowels differ. And this takes up what we call attentional control in neuroscience. And there are also words that don't look alike at all. For example, paper in Ukrainian is papir, and in Russian is bumaga. And also there's also at the sentence level, right? Like, for example, you can see from these sentences that Russian and Ukrainian syntax share a lot of similarities, but then the words don't necessarily always look the same. So I did this so much to a point that I felt that I was engaging a constant game of spot the difference, sort of, but also not really. And I was using a lot of intense mental focus to learn Ukrainian because, come on, Ukrainian is validly its own language, right? So, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the next slide. Yeah. So, from these experiences, I began to suspect that every language I learned prompted me to use very different brain muscles, and I began to realize how linguistic diversity can have very interesting implications for a field as seemingly different as neuroscience. Anyway, so the romance I had with that Siberian guy is dead, right? But the experience had sparked life throughout my PhD trajectory. I was very inspired to learn about language learner strategies and also the neuroscience of multilingualism during my doctoral years. Nowadays, I look at how people process languages that are very similar or different to what they already know and what kinds of thinking happens in their brain when they do so. And the key idea of my work in bilingualism theory is that the way that different languages are designed can in fact strengthen our brain health through interestingly different neural pathways. Now, there is perhaps a very, classic example for me to illustrate this argument. As all of you are aware, the Serbian, Bosnian, Croatian languages are really just very, very similar. I mean, they're pretty much almost identical, and they're separate into 3 different languages because of, social and political reasons. As such, a Serbian or a Croatian person could come up to you and claim to be trilingual by default without having to give the effort to learn a second language, right? And by those standards, it isn't logical to assume that a Croatian-Bosnian bilingual would exercise the brain in the same way as, let's say, a Croatian-Korean bilingual. So what is it about languages that helps to strengthen our brain? What is it about their designs, right? Okay, so firstly, we have to think about writing scripts. Some languages, such as the Chinese languages, or the Japanese kanji script, they're highly visual in nature. I mean, each character is shaped in a way that attempts to tell a story or a concept. Now, research shows that the processing of such languages can really train your visual spatial areas of the brain. And this is really helpful in the twilight years because visual spatial memory is often the first to deteriorate in neurodegenerative diseases. But that's not to say that alphabetic languages that function with spelling such as Hindi, modern Greek, Slovak, it doesn't mean that they don't train the brain at all. No, that's far from what the evidence tells us. Studies have shown that spelling in an alphabetic language, particularly a non-native one, can stimulate the phonological and analytical areas of the brain. Now, this can be training against decline of perceptual functions of sound in old age. And it also prompts the formation of what we call executive control, which refers to the collaboration of memory, flexible thinking, and self-regulation. So basically, it makes your brain a lot sharper. Another aspect whereby languages can differ drastically, I'm sure you all know, is tones. Tones. In many of what we call tonal languages, such as Vietnamese, Cantonese, Mandarin Chinese, the slightest change in tones can indicate a difference in meaning, right? Like, for example, in Mandarin Chinese, I can say ma, 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 and they all mean different things. So speakers of a tonal language can sharpen their sensitivity to nuances in sound, and this perceptual ability can be very valuable when one becomes old because deficits in central auditory processing are very key indicators of age-related cognitive decline. On another aspect of language, we have grammar. Now, I know, grammar tends to be one of the most annoying things that we can find in a language classroom. I mean, I know quite few people who actually enjoy learning a bunch of grammatical rules and applying them and filling in the blanks. I mean, maybe you guys do, but like, I mean, normal people don't really do that. Yeah, because, you know, we're not really normal people, right? Yeah, but let me tell you something, that the processing of grammar is actually a very natural mechanism that creates brain stimulation. So in languages like German, Italian, Polish, languages that feature very complex systems of tense, case, gender, and change of grammatical forms, the learner finds himself going through multiple layers of processing to extract more information about the sentence. I mean, as you can see from here. And this takes up a lot of working memory. And the demand is even higher when we have to produce grammar orally by speech, because there's a need to keep up with the talking speed while paying attention to multiple elements of grammar and choosing the most accurate form. So like the demand is higher when you're speaking rather than writing. Now this creates, as a neuroscientist, I find this fascinating because this creates a lot of neurons and, more importantly, more connections between those neurons. Oftentimes, I hear people say that they want to give up learning a language with incredibly complex grammar, like Arabic or German. But I would argue that, from a neuroscientific perspective, difficult grammar is exactly the point. Oh yeah, so yeah, if you want to know. Actually, this part, like the yellow part of the brain, that's called the cerebellum, it usually controls like balance and movement, but it's also used for when you spot grammatical mistakes. Like, yeah. It's really, like, cerebellum is like a really weird part of the brain. Okay. So sometimes it's not just the specific design of the language that matters. In many cases, the training that a second language can bring to you also depends on its relation to your first language or other languages that you may already know. If you're an English native speaker, learning a language as different as Hebrew or Farsi, for example, the amount of unfamiliar vocabulary that you have to acquire from scratch is enormous, which can have an impact on the capacity of memory that you have to develop. And because the language is so different to what you're used to, it can be very challenging to navigate, right, as many of us know. And this pushes your brain to reorganize neural networks to make your thinking more efficient. Now, the more your brain reorganizes the neural networks, the more your brain is able to retain cognitive abilities when the brain starts to weaken with older age. So it like basically makes it more active and more used to like changing. So what happens when you speak a language? So what happens when you're learning a language that's similar to one that you already know? If you're a Spanish speaker, learning a language as close as Portuguese, for example, you're exercising what we call inhibitory control, which in this case, okay, sorry, there's an R missing, which in this case refers to the ability to produce accurate forms in Portuguese while ignoring similar forms in Spanish. Now, inhibitory control is really magical because the loss of inhibition is usually a key symptom that we see in dementia patients. And I have reason to believe that because inhibitory control happens very much in the frontal part of the brain, it can have very interesting implications for certain kinds of dementia, such as frontal temporal dementia. Okay, so what am I trying to get at with all this? My point is in this talk is not for every single human being on the planet to somehow become fluent in 10 or 20 languages. I mean, we can do that, right? But like, it's not, like, not everyone out there enjoys learning languages as much as we do, so it's not always practical for everyone. But from a cognitive perspective, it can be very beneficial to engage in 5 minutes of daily training of anything that has to do with the brain, it's good. And language learning is a very natural activity that can trigger that kind of brain training. It can literally be anything. It can be memorizing new vocabulary. It can be experiencing a language with a different tonal nature. It can be producing sentences in a language that's similar to your own. Or it can be like looking at a different writing script. Whatever it is, engagement with the complex functions of language can train your brain to work harder. And the more diverse this experience is, the more areas of the brain you get to work out. In this process, we're talking not so much about fluency or mastery of the foreign language, but rather 3 things: exposure, effort, and consistency. Towards the end, I just wanted to say that languages are the most amazing invention of humankind. I think we can all agree. Because without languages, we just won't have civilization, and we just won't be here, sitting in this polyglot gathering. I'm so proud of our collective humanity for being incredibly expressive and creative in designing this one thing that we all call language. And it's really encouraging to see how this very linguistic diversity can be a natural mechanism that protects against cognitive decline. Okay, so pretty much like my talk is finished, but there's some additional food for thought. How can our general knowledge of language help us learn a linguistically distant language? I mean, these questions are kind of like relevant to like what I just mentioned in talk, but have a think, like when you're learning a language that's, I think most of you come from Indo-European like language backgrounds, but so how would your general knowledge of language help you to learn Hindi or help you to learn Korean, for example? And also, how can your previously developed language learner strategies help you learn a linguistically distant language? Yeah, so it's just some food for thought. If you want to share your thoughts with me, that's great. I'm just around. But yeah, it's just like, if you also want to like type your comments on the Slido thing later, that's also fine. But either way, I think my talk has finished, so I will stop blabbing now and head to Q&A. Okay. So first question, isn't it confusing to learn two languages, not necessarily at the same time, with so much similarities, such as examples you showed? Yes, it is. But that's exactly how inhibitory control takes place, which is, yeah, like my example with Spanish and Portuguese. I know it's confusing, but it's actually really, really good, like, for your brain to like be more sharp and clear about like differences between things. It's like kind of like a spot the difference activity. It's really good for the front part of your brain. Okay. So the second one. In your opinion, how does it, do I just, oh, okay. In your opinion, for the brain, is it better to learn many languages at beginner level at the same time or master a few languages up to advanced level? Oh my God, I love this question. I think, you know what, like I kind of mentioned, I think the most important thing is exposure, effort, and consistency, right? And I feel like as long as you're like doing something with languages, it shouldn't matter that much. But me personally, I feel that the more diverse of the languages you experience, the better it is. So I would personally, I would prefer, just from the brain perspective, I would prefer learning a lot of languages at beginner level. But at the same time, that's not always a practical thing if you're trying to find a job. So it really depends on what you want to do as a language learner. Third question, which aspects or elements of language might help with strengthening cerebellum in order to prevent delayed diseases related to this part of the brain? So the cerebellum is the part here, right? Like at the back part of your brain, it's really small. It's one of the most understudied parts of the brain. I think it's like a really tricky part. I would say that correcting grammatical mistakes is very good for strengthening cerebellum. But whether or not that helps you, whether or not that transfers to other benefits of like keeping your balance or stuff like that, I don't really know. But like I can tell you that spotting grammatical mistakes is definitely related to the cerebellum. How does dementia affect language skills of bilinguals with similar languages? Okay. Right now, the evidence that scientists have shown is that by and large, they don't think there is a very big difference between a bilingual that learns two similar languages, for example, a Spaniard speaking Portuguese, and a bilingual learning two very distant languages, Spaniards and Chinese speakers. Like they didn't find a very big difference between these two kinds of bilinguals, but that can change, and that is being challenged. That idea is being challenged. So we don't really actually know yet, but I would say, like, from my personal perspective, I just think that, like, if you learn a very similar set of language and you speak that set of language throughout your whole life, it's quite good for executive control. Again, like front part of the brain. Okay, fourth question. Is there a benefit to learning languages earlier versus later in life? So there's a thing in linguistics called the critical language hypothesis. It's not like 100%. I mean, it's sometimes challenged, this critical language hypothesis. It's basically the idea that the earlier you learn languages, the more easy it is for you to acquire them. I kind of believe in it, to be honest, because I have a 5-year-old nephew and he learns languages like much faster than I do. I would say that like some people believe that learning languages earlier is more beneficial because you learn them more quickly. But then I also think I'm kind of like an encouraging educator, so I really feel that it's never too late. You know, like if you suddenly hit 60 and you suddenly want to like pick up Arabic, go for it. Like I don't think that age should be a factor that stops people from learning languages. Can you share any research on the cognitive advantages of learning sign language? Okay, so sign language is as valid as any spoken language, as is valid. And I think that sign language is because there's no sound, right, because it's sign language. I feel that like mainly the benefit of sign language is that it trains its visual spatial cognition, even more than Mandarin, I would say, because it's like three-dimensional, you know? So I would say that, yes, sign languages definitely trains your visual spatial skills. Does the evidence suggest language study has a stronger effect than other stimulations such as Sudoku? Oh my God, this is like, I was very scared of this question because I knew it would come out. So how does language learning compare with other brain stimulating activities such as crossword puzzles, Sudoku, and whatnot? I feel that, like, if I had to give an answer, I would say that, like, when we learn a language and when we speak a language, when we read, when we listen, we're using simultaneously many different parts of the brain at the same time. Whereas when you do Sudoku or crossword puzzles, like, it's also that we use many different parts of the brain, but they can be more, like, a little bit more concentrated. So I would just say that, I guess, I'm not really sure 100% if this science is correct, but I think that in language learning, you're constantly activating like many different parts of the brain at the same time as compared with other activities, I think. Okay, the next one is, has language learning been shown to improve non-cognitive brain function in neurodegenerative diseases? I'm not sure what is meant by non-cognitive brain function because cognitive means brain. Let me think. People have been looking at whether language, okay, for example, like some people have been looking at whether language learning has anything to do with like learning music. And I feel, to be honest with you, like a lot of people think that language learning can prompt people to be a little bit, you know, because like when we, whatever activity we do, we all use the brain, right? Whether it's like music or math or language. Like people have been looking at like the connections between these fields, but I really think that it depends from person to person. Because I've seen like people who are really good at languages and they're excellent pianists, but I also have seen like people who are excellent pianists but suck at languages. So I think it really, it differs on a case-to-case basis, but yes, like some people have been looking at whether or not languages have to do with other kinds of skills. I hope that answers the question. Yeah. Do you think machine translation, when it's good enough, will make people lazy to learn languages because they can use an app? Yes, I think that it can happen for certain kinds of people, certainly not for us, but like, I feel that like, machine translation really takes away the fun of communicating with humans, doesn't it? And I also feel that, also, like if you use machine translation, like you're not really going to like stimulate your brain. Yeah, so I feel as a neuroscientist, I don't think that machine translation should, you know, replace language learning because that's just not good for humans. Oh, I love your passion about the topic. Thank you. I love my topic a lot. The next one, there's an urban myth that native Chinese speakers remember, wait, where is it? Oh, okay. There's an urban myth that native Chinese speakers remember how to write characters by muscle memory. Do you buy that? If so, does that improve brain function? Okay, muscle memory, no, I don't buy that. I believe that the evidence is not very valid, but I do think that there is a piece of work, I think from a Swedish scholar, that they say that if a child learns Chinese from a very young age, it may improve motor skills in a sense. I'm not really sure what they mean by motor skills, but there's a finding that says that. But muscle memory, I feel like I'm more of a visual person rather than like a muscle person, if that makes sense. So like, not sure. No, I don't, like personally, I don't think it's muscle memory. Is there some research out there focusing on multilingual sign language speakers? If yes, has it the same effect? Okay. You know, I believe that language is language. It doesn't matter if it's sign or spoken. And I feel that, like, I mean, there are differences between sign languages, right? For example, British Sign Language is not the same as American Sign Language. And so I believe that, like, as long as it's a different language, it will have some kind of effect on how you process them. So, yes, I feel that, well, I mean, there isn't as far as I know, I don't think there's any research out there focusing on multilingual sign language speakers in this particular topic, but I believe that it deserves to be researched. Okay, does speaking a grammatically complex language does speaking a grammatically complex language as L1 help your brain more than speaking a less complex one, or other benefits or related to only learning an L2? Okay, let me think about this question. Okay, yeah, I think I get what the question is asking. Actually, that's a really good question, because sometimes, I'm a native Mandarin speaker, right? So I'm from Taiwan, and my native language is traditional Mandarin Chinese. Sometimes I think whether or not the visual spatial stuff really applies to me, because I learned it from a really young age, I don't really, like, my mental effort to learn Mandarin isn't like a second language speaker, for example. And I actually, to be honest with you, I'm going to be very honest and say I don't really know. I don't know, but like, I feel that there's some kind of benefit of learning a language that's very complex as an adult, because I feel that the main thing is really just to give effort. You know, like, effort is the main thing that we're emphasizing here in this branch of science, is that the more effort you give, the better it is for your brain to keep active. So I would say that maybe, okay, like maybe if you learn a very complex language as an adult, that may be even more beneficial than learning it as a first language. Yeah, effort is sexy. I'm interested in how you're researching this topic. Are you conducting laboratory studies? No, I'm only doing theoretical studies. So what I do is I read a lot of literature on this topic, and I kind of do like a synopsis. Yeah, I wish I could do laboratory studies. I'm really trying to like find funding for that. But no, I just hope that one day I can actually just conduct this in a laboratory, because I'm really curious to know, for example, like Spanish speakers of Portuguese, like how does their brain like evolve over time compared with Spanish speakers of Hindi, for example? Amnesia affects episodic memory, but not knowledge. How does language learning play into that? If you remember words based on experiences that could trigger memories. Oh my God, like this is like, I feel like I'm in my like PhD, like, you know, defense. Just like, this is like really good practice. Well, it's true, but amnesia. So amnesia is very different from dementia, I would say, and episodic memory. If it's episodic, it's a little bit less connected to language than knowledge itself, I would say, I think. So honestly, I don't know what's that much about amnesia, but maybe dementia, yes. And I would say that, to be honest, there aren't as many studies on bilingualism and amnesia as bilingualism and dementia. Like bilingualism and dementia is very well studied, but not bilingualism and amnesia. But hopefully one day I can research that question and then let you know, whoever you are. Yeah. Okay, I remember you know. Sorry, I think that's the most difficult question. So thank you very much for this challenge. I really like challenging questions, actually. Are you familiar with any research that compares learning a foreign language and programming? Oh, I love this question. And how it affects the brain. Yes. So I've had this conversation with a Swedish woman once that, so she was basically trying to encourage her son to learn like, you know, like JavaScript or something like that. Like it was like a coding language, I think. And she was just asking, you know, like our group of friends whether we think that this is easier for them to learn as a child, because like if children learn human languages more easily as a child, does this apply to other languages like coding as well? And I would think that yes, I would probably agree to that. And I think that, I mean, although like the language in coding is kind of like different in nature to like human languages, but I feel that there are some aspects that kind of overlap, right? For example, attentional control. Like you can't program a language and have a bug in it, right? Like you need to pay a lot of attention to like details. So I would say that attentional control is something that programming language and human languages have in common. I think like going down to like the basics, it's really like looking at what skills or like what kinds of dimensions of the brain are used for these kinds of activities. And I would say that at least the element of attention is needed in both situations. Okay, the last one. When you spoke about the benefits of complex grammar, were you thinking about conscious analysis as we speak monitor or more about subconscious processing? I'm talking more about conscious stuff because that's a really good question, actually. I feel that like if something is subconscious, you're not actually really giving much effort, or at least you're not aware of it, right? But if it's conscious, you're very aware of the challenges. And as I said, this links back to effort, which is what really makes our neurons start to grow and develop. So I think that consciousness is a very important element in this branch of studies. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much.